Hi, everyone. Yep, my name's Khaleel Freeman. Can we give another round of applause for Anna, please, as well? She's been doing this all day. Cool. So I'm going to be talking about adopting Jetpack Compose at Adyen. We've been working with it for about 6 months now. So I'm going to put up some unsanitized code so we can all judge it together, and then we're going to hopefully make it a little bit nicer as well, okay? So I'm going to be starting off with 3 stories, okay? The first story is about over Christmas time, I was reading this book, Androids. I don't know if anyone's read it in the audience, but it's quite a nice book. And it mentions this podcast in it. So I started listening to it probably about 2 or 3 months ago. And this one was about large screens are a big deal. So it's talking about how folding displays are changing for us at the moment. And it was talking about how previously what you'd do with different size displays is you'd have an XML layout and you'd have it for different resource files, and it would change dependent when the device checks it. And what they were giving the example of is that you can use Jetpack Compose at runtime now to be checking what size screen you're working with, and it works in that way, which was quite a nice thing. But what I thought was really interesting around it is they were talking about resource files, not just as XML, but they were talking resource files in terms of colors. And they started making some funny little suggestions and going off on a little bit of a tangent. And that was, well, if we started checking how wide a screen was, if it was an even number of pixels, we could make it red, and if it was an odd number of pixels, we could make it green for fun. It's a bit trivial. And then one of the other presenters came around and said, well, does that mean that we're in an age now where this is like original web, where we've got colors and resources all within our HTML? And what happened here is the presenter turned around and said, well, that's not exactly the case, because what we can do is we can define like a typography file or a colors file. But what we're actually interested in is how are the community developing patterns that can now represent this. So that's what I'm going to be showing you what we've done at Adyen. Right, so my second story that I want to tell you about really quickly is most people have probably ignored what I've been talking about so far because my accent is a little bit funny. And if you're laughing, you're probably still not listening to me now. But the truth is I'm from a place called Liverpool in England, and in Liverpool, we're really into football. So scrap Jetpack Compose. I would like you to remember this one thing today. Liverpool beat Manchester United 5-0 at Old Trafford. So this is a big thing. Awesome. Now, I think it's a little bit ironic that they're hosting a developer conference in a football stadium because most developers don't really like football. And I think that comes due to this reason, that it's quite tribal. So we actually link it with hooligans, and we're a bit like, oh, we don't really want to be with those type of people. But I was thinking about this, like, what is a tribe? And I think a tribe is a set of ideals, shared values that people all have in common. So maybe you are listening to rock and you're listening to reggae, all right? That could be your tribe as well. Or if we think about it in another sense, it could be that development is quite tribal, right? We've got the web, and we've also got mobile. And even in those 2 different domains, we've got Android, we've got iOS. And then even at that level, we could think about in terms of the languages that people are subscribing to and the things that they like. So that's where I was at with that. And then this is my final third story that I want to tell you about. And Lucia, if you could maybe put your hands up for me. Woohoo! This is, everyone can put their hands up as well. This is Lucia, and Lucia is a designer. And I think this may be a story that a lot of people could relate to. So Lucia has been tasked with communicating to end users about mobile phones. So Lucia has a great idea. And that great idea is to use emojis. Why would we not? So, sorry. The emoji that Lucia creates is, in this case, an iPhone. And that makes me very sad. And I have to explain to her that it's not Android. It's not native. And what I'm trying to say here is so that pain as me as a developer comes from that now I have to adapt and make changes to my code base just to make it look like an iPhone. But what I thought was quite interesting around this is, where does this come from? Well, it comes from philosophies and design principles and design languages, okay? So iPhone have this thing called the HIG, which is the Human Interface Guidelines. And what they believe in is that you should be shown depth by blurring out the background and having a little clear bit of text on top of it. And what Android believe is they come from material design, and they believe that what you should be doing is you should be having elevation and surfaces and background dictate how we show this. So I said this to a friend, and he was a bit like, I have no idea what you mean. I don't have an iPhone. I was like, all right, cool. So I had to fix this. So this is actually WhatsApp at the moment, and if you don't know, this is what you can do now. You can do inline reactions, which I thought was pretty cool. And on the left-hand side, I've taken a screenshot of an iPhone, and you can see how they can quite easily blur the background. It's built into their APIs. It's quite nice and easy. For Android, that's quite difficult. But on the right-hand side, you can see here, maybe a little bit around each of these, like speech pills, bubbles, whatever you want to call them. There is a tiny little bit of elevation, and that's where those differences will come from. So even though it's a 6-inch display, you're always going to see these differences now because it comes from 2 different philosophies. Okay, so the good news is, although I'm telling you about these differences, since we've been using Compose, I believe it gives a lot of flexibility. So what we can do is we can adapt those designs to match whatever design language you want to come from. So that's what I'm going to delve into a little bit. But before we talk about Compose, we need to talk about adoption. And specifically, this is an adoption continuum that I have created, but you can all think about it as well. So on the left-hand side, we have Keep, which is Kotlin's evolution and enhancement process. And this is how they adopt new ideas for the language. It's set up on GitHub, and what they do is they open pull requests, and they have a nice big discussion, and it's how the language evolves over a certain amount of time. So this is my anchoring point, okay? And over this side, what I'm calling ad hoc could also be the wild, wild west. And I've worked on projects previously where people are able to adopt whatever library they want, which is kind of great, I guess, if you're a solo developer. But as soon as you're in a team, it becomes a little bit more difficult to manage. So I think the example that I worked with is we had 4 different contractors come onto the project, and they brought in 4 unit testing libraries. I'm really happy they're writing unit tests, but now what we've got to do as the permanent members of staff, because they're going to leave, is maintain those libraries, learn different patterns, and it just becomes a little bit more difficult to maintain. So wild, wild west, and there's Keep. So where do we stand at Adyen with this? Well, what these are here, these are the Agend Formula, which is essentially the principles that guide the behavior of Adyen. Now, I wouldn't read all of them because it's a bit much, but this one is interesting. This is, we launch fast and iterate. So how does this behavior drive our culture? Well, what we do is we create U-Track tickets. And simply on those U-Track tickets, we say, hey, it would be great if we could adopt this new library. And what we have is a quick discussion about it. And then if it's a small change, that'll be able to go into the code base and we're all happy with it. So we've got visibility. Now, if it's a larger change, I think the example I could give here would be Hilt. It had a lot of files when we started changing with dependency injection. We create a feature branch and we simply talk around it maybe for an hour or 2 and make sure that everyone's got the same ideas around it. So it makes it a little bit easy to bring everyone on board. So this is how we adopt change. Great. So that's all out the way. What I'm going to jump into now is actually Jetpack Compose. I'll give you some examples around it. This is the one moment where I give you all a big disclaimer. Do not read the code, please, okay? And it's not because it's bad, it's because you won't listen to me, and I'm more important than this code, okay? Sweet. Okay. So first commit, what's it all about? Well, to be frank, what we need to do is we need to just get it in the code base. We need to make sure that it works functionally, and we wrote some unit tests for it, and we got to that place, so we were quite happy. And then what happens is we can start having a look at it in our reviews and start making suggestions and changes. So I hope everyone can see that green underline. A comment was made in a pull request saying, hey, we're missing something here. We need to fix this. And what we needed to fix was we didn't set the view composition strategy. Okay? This is all very Jetpack Compose specific, and what it really relates to is the fact that we're moving from a single activity, multi-fragment application to an application now that we're going to change out these fragments, but we're going to have Jetpack Compose work in them instead. So this comment was made, and the developer kindly made this extension function. Fine. And what does that look like to use it? Well, you can see here on the top, previously we would have had this compose view require context, set content apply, fine, fine, fine. But now what he did is he created it where we can just go with compose view and it works. So in terms of development, this makes me happy. Okay, so going back to this original commit, we'll have a little bit more of a deeper dive and a little bit more of a discussion around this bit, shopper theming. Okay, so previously I mentioned that we've talked about iOS, where it has the HIG, and we talked about material design, where it has for Android. So we've actually got an extra design language that we have to work with at Adyen, and this is because we have what I'm going to call Linux-based terminals, so they have their own style that they need to work with, and we're adapting them to Android-based terminals as well. If you're not aware of what a terminal is, in English we call it a chip and pin machine. In the Netherlands they call it pinnen. I think in Germany they don't have it because they pay with cash, but that's fine. But yeah, what we have here is we have a light theme, which is merchant-facing, and we have a dark theme, which is shopper-facing. And on the right-hand side, you can see a bunch of typography as well. So notice it's called status instruction primary. Okay, so what we did is, and this is literally is lifted out of the examples that they will give you on the documentation. We just set up a new theme. We call it app theme. At the bottom, you can see merchants and shopper. So we've got these two themes, and then we're going to set up these colors. So again, we have a little dig into them. And for colors, you can see on the left-hand side in blue, we've got things like background, primary, and error. And again, this is from the design language of material design. And on the right-hand side, you can see some lovely little comments that we've left, which are base and cancel. And that's just mapping to a bit of the design language that's coming from Adyen as well. All right, and if we have a look a bit about typography to get a bit more of an idea around this. Too much code. We'll shrink it down a little bit. Oh, we go back again. Yep, we shrink it down a little bit. Again, on the left-hand side in blue, you'll see things like default font family, H3, H5. Brilliant. And on the right-hand side, you can see some comments that were made to say, hey, we're mapping to this value in our design language. Okay, great. And this was fine. This is how we used it to begin with. And then later on, we made some extension functions, which would be typography status text, which would be mapping to H3. And again, instruction primary, which would map to H5. Okay, so this is how we're going to use it. We're going to set up our Agend theme. We're going to set it to a specific color theme. In this case, it's either merchant or shopper. And we can see its use cases here. Now, if you look carefully, you'll see material theme typography subtitle 1, and you'll see material typography information big primary. Now, this makes me very sad because we've now got two ways of accessing the same type of property. So at this point, I'm thinking, well, we tried to do something, but it's failed. All right. So these are the options that we're left with when we're working with theming in Android, specifically with Compose. So we tried extending, and we've realized that didn't work. And what this is, the way I've layered it, is I think it gets amount of work that you've got to do. So extending was the easiest thing that you can do. And then we're going to have a little bit look about what a fully custom theme would mean. On the left-hand side, you've got a button. Okay, this is just a basic button class in Jetpack Compose. I think I've used a button in the example here because it's pretty standard to every app. I don't think any other interface is not going to have a button that a user needs to click on. And a button relies on button defaults, button colors. And on the right-hand side, I'm going to show you what button colors actually are. And button colors are a set of colors that are defined by the Android framework and are dependent on material design. Okay, so if I was to expand this a little bit, if we were to say we're going to set up a fully custom theme, what this means and what they suggest you do is they suggest you create a Agend button wrapper, which will then call the button class, and we'll set up a bunch of colors there to override these material defaults. That's an okay suggestion, but I don't think it's a really scalable solution, really, because am I going to create one for a toggle, for a slider, and for any other view? No, it's not going to work. Also, another problem I think would that be, if you had a new developer that was to come into the code base, they would also naturally want to use the button class. Why would they know that they've got to use this Agend button? So it's not great for maintainability. Okay, so that leaves us with replacing a system. So how did we approach replacing a system? Okay, so these are three values that we've defined here. It's a lot of code, it's kind of long, it's a bit confusing, but the three things that you need to look at here are that we have Agend dimensions that we're setting up Agend colors, and we're setting up Agend typography. Okay, that's fine. We're setting up this static composition locale. Okay, that's a bit random, but what that essentially is relating to is it relates to implicit dependencies that composable functions are going to depend on, which is a bit of a mouthful. So I'm going to explain that properly in the next slide. And then the last thing here is that we all initialize them to an exception initializer. So that means if you try to use this property without it being set, we're going to throw an exception. Cool. So again, on the left-hand side, we've got our Agend theme, and that's our composable function. So this is going to be the top of our tree that we're going to set up and go into. And we can see here that we're now defining our local diamonds, local colors, and local typographies. So if we are to set up our theme and use it that way, then it will work. And on the right-hand side, you can see how it accesses those properties. Now, what I was talking about when I was talking about implicit dependencies is within your composable function, you will just call Agend theme dot, and then either diamonds, colors, or typography, and you'll be able to get that dependency. But it's implicit because you're not passing it through. Cool. So I'm going to jump into and explain exactly how we've set up our themes now as well for merchants and shopper. We've used a sealed interface for the theme object. It's got those three properties in that I previously mentioned, and we set them up for merchants and shopper. We're using this because we want to be a constrained hierarchy for the classes. So yeah, this is all good Kotlin stuff. And maybe we can have a little look into merchant colors and see what we're using there. Okay, so this is where it becomes a little bit nicer. We set up an Agend colors. On the left-hand side, we've got this green 40, again from the design language of Agend. And on the right-hand side, we've got colors, and it's mapped to their hex code value. Key to note here is that this is private to a class. And again, in this little tiny object, we've got those core colors which are defined. And elements, highlight, confirm, correct. These are all, again, from the design language from Agend. And if you note that they actually only reference values like Agend color white and a blue 40. So we're not creating colors anywhere now, we're just constraining it to one place. And again, you can see how merchants and shopper only talk to those objects with the Agend colors. Okay, so I wanted to show you where some of these merchant colors and shopper colors are used. They're used in this object that we've called material theme defaults. And the reason that we're setting this up is because what we're going to do is we're going to set up our theme and the colors that we want, and then for the buttons and all those sliders, we want them to have some default values, so this is how we're doing it here. I think what's nice to see about this class as well is that we've got private values for dark materials and light materials as well at the bottom. And then we've just got this extension function value, however you want to describe it. Okay? Back to this theme interface, we want to dive into Agend typography. And with Agend typography, again, I've redacted it a little bit. So we've got status text, instruction primary, and instruction secondary. The couple of values that are set inside of here are, again, also private to this class. So we're only exposing the Agend typography object. And also what's quite nice here, note that we're adding another extension property to the materials theme defaults. But if you look at the value that it's accessing, it's also private to this class. Cool. So that's a big rundown of how it's set up. And you can see there, the material theme has now got these default values which we can use. Okay. So how does that look to use? Well, the way we set it up now is we're using this Agend theme and we're passing in a type. We just thought it was a little bit nicer to set it up with types as opposed to passing in the value. It made the API look a little bit nicer for us. And then on the right-hand side, you can now see that we're accessing it through Agend theme typography information small, and it forces people to be accessing it that way as well. And you could do Agend theme colors tertiary. Cool. I think before, when I showed you that it was set to these initialization exceptions, if you were to try to access either typography information, the app would crash if you were not to do it inside of the Agend theme composable at the top of the tree. So it kind of enforces those values a little bit. If you really wanted to think about it, you could maybe take it to a place where you want to maybe put some rules in with detect and have some static analysis, maybe go over this before a pull request to just confirm that developers are doing the right thing. But yeah, this is how we constrained it essentially. So yeah, this makes me happy. The simple things in life. All right, so to give everyone a review, I think when we're talking about Jetpack Compose, I think we need to talk about, I think you should just go for it, but you've got to assess what level of risk and adoption that you have. So if you could maybe take this into your code base in a small place and then try it and then go for it, I think you've got to. I think if it's a small refactor, for example, the extension function, just let one person do it, okay? I think for a larger refactor, for example, not when we were doing the extensions on the themes, but when we were replacing a system, we actually have multiple people working on it together because they wanted to work creating their API for everyone. I think it's imperative to know that it's iterative. Everyone's going to learn in the process with this. No one starts off as an expert, and you're not going to write perfect code straight away. I hope that you've managed to see that what I've been doing here is that we are happy to show you code that doesn't work straight away. I think it's important that you use the type system, so use those data classes, use those sealed classes as well, sealed interfaces if you like, to enforce some of that behavior. And I really want to stress that you should think about visibility. When you're using Jetpack Compose and you're setting this type of stuff up, think what you can access and where you can access it to try and drive how you're going to design it. Cool. Right, so I'll leave you with one last slide. If anyone doesn't know what this is a Luddite. And what a Luddite is in 18th century England, 19th century England, they were destroying text mills and wool mills because they seen it as a threat to their livelihood. So what these guys were is they were anti-technology. They were anti-progress, okay? So if you don't adopt Jetpack Compose, I would call you a Luddite. Yeah. Or what you could do is you could become, hey, a Liverpool fan, because we're playing next week against Real Madrid in Paris, and we need as much support as possible. I can hear my manager here going, Khaleel, you need to promote Adyen. Maybe we're hiring. If you're a Manchester United fan, do not apply, okay? Okay, thank you.